outside the gate stuff, litter control and that kind of thing. Yeah. He should have retired about 7 years ago, but he keeps hanging around so he can witness to those guys.
Name Leon?
No, Leon passed away.
Leon passed away?
I remember him.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that.
Leon passed away. All my guys, except for the oldest one. What's his name? He's 89. He calls me about once a month, wanting to know when he's going to be able to go back in the jail. Yeah.
He misses it.
Yeah. Leon used to send me guys.
Leon. He called me. And we missed each other 3 or 4 times. He left a message, said that he was not feeling good. He didn't know if he had COVID or not. And I didn't hear from him for about a week or 2. And so I called him back, and his granddaughter answered his phone and said he had passed away.
Well,
they go grin all the time.
He said you definitely know where he's going.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He's got a lot of jewels in that crown. He's got a lot to offer Jesus when he gets saved.
Great guy. Yeah. He came to church a few Wednesday nights to study.
I remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he's in the hospital.
We got along good. And then there was another one out there that had been there forever. He died of COVID too. So yeah, it's been lost all my volunteers on the men's side and lost all but one on the men's side, and lost all but 2 on the women's side. Yeah. All right, we're gonna start and see if anybody else can mosey in. I know that Tessa was not going to be able to be here. She's got work stuff next couple of weeks. And I don't know about the others. But so we're in Nehemiah chapter 3. And what we're going to do is probably won't take the whole time. We are going to spend some time at the end of our lesson tonight praying for Burke and that situation, and now the other situation. Marcelo's making a list for us as we go on tonight. We'll pray for that, and then there's some things in the world I guess need some prayer. What do y'all think?
Oh, definitely.
And yeah, we'll spend some time on that. We're to the point though. Chapter 3 really is the purpose for why Nehemiah and Ezra had been given a commission to go back to Jerusalem and work. And so it's the shut that door, please. I don't know what they're doing in there, but I can.
They're having worship.
Are they? Wow, they enthusiastic tonight. So this is the reason why they came, but it's not the reason why we're interested in the book, if I can say it that way. This is an important part of their mission, but we learn some things through this activity that means more than just having a wall around a city. So chapter 3 is pretty boring. It lists, as we go through chapter 3, there's 42 sections in this one chapter, and it lists everybody that worked on their section of the wall. Now, the wall around Jerusalem, according to archaeologists, it's really an unsettled area. Anywhere from 90 acres to 250 acres would be the size, and the wall being anywhere from a little under 2 miles to 2.5 miles long. So the only reason why that matters is so that we kind of get a good idea about what each group was doing. Before Nehemiah shows up to town, there really wasn't this organization in place to build the wall. There was, it was really haphazard. And Nehemiah comes, most scholars believe, out of his experience in the royal court, he had learned some things about organization and about getting things done. And so he put that to use when they start rebuilding the wall. So all in all, there's no consensus on how long the wall actually was. Like I just said, between a little under 2 miles to a little over 2.5 miles. So there were 41 parties that are named as participating in the reconstruction of 42 sections. So one group actually did 2 sections. There were 10 gates that were rebuilt. And we're not going to read through all. We're not going to really read through it at all. There's a couple of highlights that we're going to look at. But there were 10 gates that were built, and each section, if everybody had an equal section, and some of them weren't equal. The eastern side of Jerusalem sits on a steep hill, and so that area of the wall, they didn't quite have as much to worry about because it was much harder work to complete. But the average is about 250 feet. So they had less than a football field's length to build. And then certain groups that would build their length, they also had a gate to rebuild. And it describes what they did to have to rebuild the gate. So they started at the north end of Jerusalem, and they worked in the counterclockwise section, or they're listed in counterclockwise sections all the way around, back around from the south, and then when we get to the east, where it's a little more steep and a little more difficult. From archaeological evidence, it appears as though some sections of that portion of the wall were left kind of incomplete. Not that they were completely left alone, but they didn't get the attention that the rest of it did. Most of this, it describes at the end that they got the entire wall around the city about halfway up. But when they look at archaeological evidence on the east side, there were some sections that were so difficult to work on, they probably didn't get that high. So these little groups had less than a football field long that they were working on. Now there's a couple of things here. In verse 5, it says there was one group called the Tekoites, which we came across before, the workers of Tekoa. Some of the Tekoites were allies with David, then later they were not allies with the southern kingdom, and now they're back. And they're a part of what's going on with the rebuilding of the wall. So they had been kind of accepted back into the friendship with the Judites. That they made repairs, but their nobles did not lift a finger to help. So this is the thing that's going on. There's the people, these common people that have come back from Judah, from Babylon to Judah, that really didn't have anything. They show up, and there's people living there, and imagine this: you're in a town, and it's got 1,000 people in it, and you've created an economic system that can take care of 1,000 people pretty easy. Well, now here comes 3,000 people, and they show up with nothing except for what they need to rebuild the wall. And so, how do you feed those 3,000 people? Where do you house 3,000 people? Where do you do all of this stuff? Okay, so the people that are going to wind up paying for that and providing for that are not the poor people in the land. They don't have anything. It's going to be the rich people. Okay, so they're upset about it. So they're not helping this happen at all. All right, that's the whole point of that whole little section there, and it lists the Tekoahite nobles, but this was a problem all the way through, which we'll see in chapter 4. So that's one thing that is interesting about it. There's another section down here, I forget where it is, that names the daughters that helped build the wall. So it's one of those places where we're reminded. Oh wait, I want to change that. Especially in the Hebrew culture, the woman's activity is always as important as the men's. Although they may not hold the same status, the Bible over and over and over and over makes clear that God honors what their contribution to what's going on. And so this rebuilding of the temple and rebuilding of the wall, we're reminded of that. So we go through that whole little section there, chapter 3, and it just keeps repeating what they did. It also mentions in there that the Levites had their homes established in the city already. They'd been there now nearly 70 years, and they worked on those areas that they could fortify near their cities. So the implication, and all the way through chapter 4, is describing the work that was done, but it also is reminding us that because the Levites are there and the priests are there, there was worship still going on. It's just not mentioned. So they're in a routine of life that is becoming more normal. The only thing that's not normal now is the economic situation that they're in, which we're going to explore in chapter 4. And there's still some pretty stiff opposition to what's going on by what appears to be the more noble or more the rich people. Okay, so in chapter 4, y'all may remember Sanballat. We mentioned him a few times. He was the one that brought opposition. The first time he heard that and this is Nehemiah speaking from the first person, was rebuilding the wall, he became furious. And that word furious is akin to the word that his nostrils were flaring. Okay, he's really mad. So he mocked the Jews, so he's making fun of them. And it's a derision that wants to lead them to believe that they are somehow or another inferior or conquered in a sense, which is the opposite. That's true. They were exiled, but now they've been set free with a mission by the king to do the very work that they're doing. So they're mocked by the Jews before his colleagues and the powerful men of Samaria. So these are who? Who's the powerful men? The rich people. Okay? And said, what are these pathetic Jews doing? Okay? So name calling. That's the first, to be honest, that's the first place people usually go when they don't know what else to do with who you are and what you're about. The first thing that happens usually is some good old name calling. So he says, what are these pathetic Jews doing? Can they restore it, meaning the wall, by themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? So what's those two questions are implying what? They've got to have God's help in this if they're going to do this. But are they making sacrifices? Well, it's a rhetorical question, but they are making sacrifices. We know that from the Ezra account, and because the Levites and priests are there. And then the next question is, will they ever finish it? Meaning that this is too big of a job for them. Can they bring these burnt stones back to life from the mounds of rubble? Nebuchadnezzar burnt the whole city. Okay, so everything there had the tinge of smoke and fire still on it. A terrible reminder that they had been defeated before, and Sanballat keeps reminding them of that and says that you're still defeated. You can't bring this back to life. Tobiah, his buddy, the Ammonite, who was beside him, said, indeed, even if a fox climbed up what they are building, he would break down their stone wall. So he's saying they don't know anything about what they're doing. They're just piling rocks on top of each other, and they're not building a wall. So, very often when we are undertaking the work that God's given us to do, there's opposition that really, it stings, but nothing that they are saying has an impact on anything that they're really doing. So the surest way to it's human nature to believe that if we can just insult a person enough or beat them up enough with our words, that they'll fold under that kind of pressure. Here lately, when we were observing this terrible injustice that's going on in the Ukraine, one of the things you hear about every day is the propaganda war. Mm-hmm. Who's going to win the propaganda war? Because if you can win the propaganda war, then you keep the morale of the people and they'll fight. So this is the same kind of thing. They're hoping to demoralize them. So if the opposition can win the propaganda war, then they feel like they can keep this from happening. The people will disperse. The taxes won't go up. I won't have to take money out of my pocket to support these hordes of people. Okay? And besides, we like it the way it is. We've been here for 70 some odd years. Well, some of them over that, 150 years. And we don't want people coming in. Especially people that have a claim. Everybody knew the history of the Hebrew people. They understood that they believed with their lives that God had given them that land and that they were going to establish a nation again for God in that land. So if you'd been there, you and your ancestors, for 150 years, you weren't going to be willing to just give it up. So this was the first salvo, is to try to beat them at the propaganda war. Maybe they'll become demoralized and leave. And then verse 4 is a prayer. So, and we assume that it's offered by Nehemiah, since he's the one that's speaking through the letter. Listen, our God, for we are despised. So he's acknowledging what's happening. These people cannot stand the air we breathe. Okay? Make their insults return on their own heads, and let them be taken as plunder to a land of captivity. So Nehemiah is saying, let happen to them what's happened to us. Yeah. Okay, don't let their words stand. And so we're thinking here, that's not the right prayer. That's not a prayer Jesus would pray. Right. Well, he didn't know anything about the Sermon on the Mount yet, where Jesus said, love your enemies. It wasn't a part of the economy of God at this point. He had other things he had to do.
Power coals on their head.
yeah. So he's saying, let their insults to us become the insult on their own lives. Do not cover their guilt or let their sin be erased from your sight, because they have angered the builders. So what is Nehemiah saying? We're here as your servants. We've been sent here to reestablish your city, the city of God, the city of David, your temple, and these people are trying to stop that. So let your anger, pour out your anger on them, God. Okay, and that's really what he's asking. Don't let them get away with this. Then he goes on. So we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had the will to keep working. So opposition came. They didn't stop working. And they got the wall. Some places the wall was as high as 30 feet. So we can imagine that a wall 15 feet high. The roof in the fellowship hall is 22 feet high. So if you come down there about 5 feet, yeah. That would have been the height.
That's tall.
So pretty tall, yeah. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, they got in on it, Ammonites, the Ashdodites, heard that the repair to the walls of Jerusalem were progressing and that the gaps were being closed, they became furious. Their nostrils began to flare again. All right, so now they've got a coalition that's being put together here. All this bunch comes together, and they plotted together. So they're coming up with a plan of action against God's people and against those that are working on the wall. And they've kind of plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem, to throw it into confusion. So every time that we've, up until this point in our brief survey of history now, well, I'll say brief, about the last 8 months, every time that something's been thrown into confusion, it's been God that's done it. Okay? So if you take the long view of the writer that's kind of putting all this together, we see that these people, by saying that they're trying to cause confusion, they're trying to operate in a way that God would. It's a power thing at this point. Okay, it's not just propaganda. They are going to exercise a sense of power over those that are working on the wall. And so what is Nehemiah's response to that? They're going to try to use the power that God uses, confusion. Nehemiah says, so we prayed to our God. So in one sentence, he kind of makes sure that the reader and everybody knows that to set things right in this, we pray to God. But not only do we pray to God, he does a very practical thing and stationed a guard because of the day and night. So he knows well enough that we stay near to God, and that God has given this to do, and he will allow us to do it. But he's practical enough to know that there is something that we can do in cooperation with God that is going to make this equally successful. All right? So that's important. That's an important lesson for us. We often pray, and our prayer has the intention of God doing something without us, that it needs to be done to us. And here we find that the prayer is just, we prayed to God. It doesn't even say what they prayed for, prayed about. We just know that God is included in their life at that point through the activity of prayer. And they are also using their practical good sense to say, if we want to keep our enemies away, we're going to use a sword. And so they stationed guards day and night. In Judah it was said, the strength of the laborer fails, since there is so much rubble. We will never be able to rebuild the wall. Okay? So that is what was being said. This is some of what they're praying. And our enemy said, don't they realize it? Whoops. Don't they, our enemy says, they won't realize it until we're among them and can kill them and stop the work. So they started with words. They formed a coalition that they felt was strong enough to attack the workers in Jerusalem, and they came up with a plan. We're going to sneak up on them and we're going to kill them. That's the battle plan. All right? When the Jews who lived nearby arrived, they said to us time and again, everywhere you turn, they attack us. All right? So I stationed people behind the lowest sections of the wall at the vulnerable areas. So this is what was happening. They were working. Their enemies were finding the low spots in the wall, climbing over, getting behind the wall, and attacking those that were working. Doesn't ever say that they killed anybody. It just says that they're attacking them. This word gets back to Nehemiah. And so his solution to that is, I'm going to fill the gap with guards. We don't have time right now to go back and fill those spots in the wall with stones and mortar and whatever they were using to build the wall. We're gonna stand in the gap, okay, with our people. So you've heard that expression, stand in the gap. Now you know where it came from. It came from this. They were standing in the gap in the wall, and they were defending those who were actually doing the work. So Nehemiah's got a plan too, a very practical plan. They're gonna continue to work, and they're gonna ask their brothers to guard them while they're working. Verse 14. Oh, I stationed them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. Okay, why did they station them by families? Any idea why he would do that? See, we would think if you station them by families and somebody gets in the wall and kills them, the whole family's wiped out. Okay, but so why would he station by families?
Each family had a piece of the wall.
Each family had a piece of the wall, and if somebody comes over the wall and you got to fight to defend your family. So the idea Nehemiah had about this is you're going to fight even more fervently because your family's there with you. You're not going to let them kill your family. So he's using the love of family, but also that great promise of God that the land belongs to those with the genealogy of Abraham. And so to ensure that your family survives ensures that you have your inheritance in the land, see? So you can protect your family while you are protecting your Hebrew brothers and sisters. He says, after I made an inspection, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officers, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the great and awe-inspiring, remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord, and fight for your countrymen, your sons and daughters, your wives, and your home, and your homes. So he's saying he's got an order of allegiance here as you are fighting. We're doing this for God. He sent us here to do this. And so he's given us a mission, and we're going to fight to complete it. Okay, fight for your countrymen. The promise was made to the children of Abraham, and that was the countrymen. Fight for your sons and daughters. They will be the inheritance of the land, okay? They're going to be the ones to remain here. And your wives and your homes, because that is the life that you live today. All right, so the reality of the day comes last in the order that it is listed. Because if your children survive and you don't, everything that God has promised to your countrymen will survive, and everything that God had intended for his life in this land with his people would be secure. So that's what that's about. Now when we carry that over into our Christian relationship with God, we live our lives according to the will and purpose of God. That's where we find everything about our life. And to look at it in a little different way, when you find your place in a struggle to establish the life of the church. In today's world, we really have to fight for that. It's not like it was 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. We're kind of in a fight to establish that, but so we have to do it if we're going to have it. And then the other side of that is we want our children to understand and know what this is about. We can't make the decision for them, but we certainly don't want them to be ignorant about it. And then I can tell you, Patsy and I hope it's one of my greatest joys is to be able to live that life I'm talking about with my wife and establish a home in that. So it's kind of the same story. Not completely the same, but I think it makes a nice allegory. My religious professors wouldn't want me to do that, but I just did it. Okay, so the sword and the trowel. You got a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. When our enemies heard that we knew their scheme, okay? So a little spy going on, I guess. Maybe they were loudmouths about it. When we knew their scheme and that God had frustrated it, meaning that God had put forth this plan that Nehemiah had put forth to his people, every one of us returned to his own work on the wall. From that day on, half of my men did the work while the other half held spears, shields, bows, and armor. So, the workers are cut in half. but they don't have to worry about being attacked while they work, so they probably got more work done. The laborers who carried the loads worked with one hand and held a weapon with the other. Each of the builders had his own sword strapped around his waist while he was building, and the one who sounded the ram's horn was beside me. So everybody had their weapon close by in case they needed it. The people that were carrying the materials to and from for work, they had their weapon. Everybody was ready to defend themselves if attacked. And then Nehemiah had set out a signal system where if someone was being attacked, they would blow the ram's horn. People would come to the sound of the horn, and everybody would thwart the attack of those opposing him. Then I said to the nobles, officials, and the rest of the people, the work is enormous and spread out. Yeah, maybe over 2 miles of wall that they're working on, so they are spread out, a football field apart most of the time. We are separated far from one another along the wall. Whenever you hear the sound of the ram's horn, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So, this must have been the way that Nehemiah was doing this. He was just circuit riding or circuit walking that wall and keeping a lookout. And when he would see trouble, he would run and they would blow the ram's horn. And then everyone would come running and God would fight the battle. They knew where their strength was, they knew where their courage was, and they knew that in order for this to succeed for the right reasons, God was going to be in the middle of it. So they let God fight the battle. Our God will fight for us. He said, so we continued the work while half of the men were holding spears from daybreak until the stars came out. So they worked long days. At that time, I also said to the people, let everyone and his servant spend the night inside Jerusalem so that they can stand guard by night and work by day. And I, my brothers, my servants, and the men of the guard with me never took off their clothes. Each one carried his weapon, even when washing. So
they slept with their boots on.
They slept with their boots on. Even when they were taking a bath, they had their sword with them. Okay. So if you recall earlier, it talked about how they had settled in Jerusalem and some of the people had settled in the hill country. Okay, so now Nehemiah is telling them, nobody goes home to the hill country. Everybody stays inside the wall until we get this thing finished.
Well, that had to be one heck of a life, to be on guard every minute of your life, to not be able to have a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
Because your enemy was right there, just right on the other side of that wall, ready to attack at all times.
Yeah. Well, and maybe the sense of saying God will fight our battles allowed for them to have a little rest and peace. Not knowing that they didn't have to rely on their own strength. They could rely on God's in the midst of it. But yeah, it wasn't anything pleasant about it. But so much of what God asks us to do isn't wrapped up in a pink bow. You know? A lot of it's hard. And but if he's there with us, at least we know that we can get the job done. Okay, so chapter 5, we're going to look at 5 because it talks about, or at least CSV subtitles it, social injustice. There's some things that are going on that are not good. And Nehemiah is reminding them of some things in the law that they are forgetting, conveniently forgetting. So this is about, as I mentioned before, you've got an inflationary problem in the city, and you also have a famine going on at the same time. So when that happens, well, after a hurricane or a flood, if you find out that somebody's selling $5 gas, you get mad because they're gouging, okay? They're taking advantage of some person's pain and suffering. Well, keep that in mind as we look at this because it's the same kind of things that were going on. So there was a widespread outcry from the people and their wives. Okay, so this is the people. This is the same kind of designation of the common people, the people of the land that we talked about earlier, having so much influence. Well, this is just a regular run-of-the-mill, middle class, lower middle class, poor people. And there was a widespread outcry. This is a problem that existed across the whole community. And it didn't just include the men complaining about this. Their wives were there with them too, which means it must be serious. So there's an outcry from the people and their wives against their Jewish countrymen. Okay, so this is against their own people, their own flesh and blood, their own race. Some were saying, "We, our sons and our daughters, are numerous. Let us get grain so that we can eat and live." So they're wanting grain. All right. If there were those who had planted fields, what was the old Levitical law when you had a harvest? You left some you left the edges for what?
Poor people could come.
Yeah, glean the fields, and so it wasn't being done. Let us get grain so that we can live. Or at least let us buy some. They may not have been letting them buy it because they were in a famine and they were keeping it for themselves. Okay? Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, vineyards, and homes to get grain during the famine. So there were some who had property and they were having to mortgage it in order to get cash in their pockets so that they could buy something to eat during this famine. Okay, so it's getting pretty bad. It would be the same as some of us are mortgaging our fields so we can buy gasoline. Because it's $5 a gallon.
I know, I'm looking for a
It's the same kind of mentality. I was talking to a guy that's over the fleet for the sheriff, and the price of the gas, it costs them $100 more a fill up now than it did a year ago. And so you start thinking about that. That's our tax money.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out what to do about that. Everybody's going to be screaming, we can't pay more taxes. See, it's the same thing they were saying here. Still others were saying, we have borrowed money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards.
Yeah.
So here we go. We've got, there's just problems with just getting food, period. You got the problem of having to mortgage what you own in order to survive. And then others are borrowing money to meet the obligations to the state. Okay? And then it goes on in verse 5. We and our children are just like our countrymen and their children, yet we are subjecting our sons and daughters to slavery. So what was going on here? They couldn't pay their debt, so they were taking their children into slavery. Okay? Now this cleans it up, but when it talks about some of our daughters are already enslaved, that word enslaved is not a pretty word, man. It talks about rape. It says some of our daughters are already being sexually violated because of what is going on. It says, but we are powerless because our fields and vineyards belong to others, meaning that they've already mortgaged their inheritance in order to survive, and now they're even having to give up their daughters. So you see the wickedness that it doesn't take much for it to just get back in there, And some people would say, "Oh, what's that line? It's just business." Yeah, it's one of the worst things in the world. I remember we did a study. It was a Tim Keller book on forgiveness, and there was a car dealer in New York, and he had his salespeople look at some statistics on their sales to determine who was paying more for their cars than others. And he discovered in this that black women were paying more for his cars than anyone else because they didn't know how to do the deal. They didn't know how to talk anybody down. They didn't know enough about cars and finance and all those things to pay less. So they were just having to pay more. And the owner of that dealership put a program in place where they always paid less. And so he did the right thing. And that is the kind of thing that Nehemiah is about to put forth, see. So it says, so I became extremely angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. After seriously considering the matter, okay, seriously considering is this kind of thing. He didn't make a snap ruling or judgment about this. He looked at the whole information. He looked at his people. He looked at everything that was going on. And he came up with a consistent and fair way of dealing with this that was inside the will of God already. All right? After seriously considering the matter, I accused the nobles and officials, saying to them, each of you is charging your countrymen interest. What does Leviticus say about that? Not supposed to charge interest to your countrymen. Now, you could charge interest to a foreigner, but if they remained in the land, what happened in the seventh year? Went away. Okay? So each of you is charging your countrymen interest. So I called a large assembly against them. All right, so what is that? What's this saying? Nehemiah gathered up the people that were making the complaint and put them before the ones who were misusing them because of their pain and suffering. So is this a proper way to do something? I'm just asking as a question.
You mean for Nehemiah?
Well, for us today.
We put them face to face.
Yeah, those that are offending should have to face those that they are offending. Yeah. In fact, our court system's built on that. You get to face your accuser. It doesn't matter who you are in court. Rich, poor, young, old, black, white, doesn't matter. And so here is the principle of that. Everyone gets to face one another. Okay? What value does that hold? When you have to sit in a room and face one another when you disagree or been offended.
You said about it just being business, okay? When you have a person in front of you instead of a number or a figure, okay?
It's no longer just business,
It's
right?
no longer just business, okay? This is a starving, dying person.
Yeah.
This is not our profit margin.
Yeah. Like the dealer in New York. He looked at it and he said, that's a person they just don't know. They don't know what I know. And he could have said, yeah, we're going to sell more cars to black women because I can make more money off of them, but he didn't do that. Okay? Because he saw them as people. Well, that's what this is about in a real sense. When we begin to see the situation and with that human element, it should really change things every time. He says, he says, so I called a large assembly against them, and I said, we have done our best to buy back our Jewish countrymen who were sold to foreigners, but now you sell your own countrymen, and we have to buy them back. So what is he talking about? When they returned from the exile, there were Jews that were in slavery. So how did you get them out of slavery? You had a kinsman that would go redeem them out of slavery. So he says, we have been busy trying to buy back our people. Okay, and here you are putting them in slavery again for some money, and we're going to have to go buy them back. All right? So this was human trafficking. Now, pure and simple. And Nehemiah has been trying to correct this problem, and these people are just making it worse, making the problem worse and making their lives worse. And this is what happened. They remained silent and could not say a word. That's a sure sign of your guilt. When you got nothing to say when you're faced with an accusation, you know that it's wrong. Then I said, what you're doing isn't right. And then this next line is important because it goes back to the law and back to the reason why there are people at all. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God and not invite the reproach of our foreign enemies? Okay? So shouldn't you just fear God and what He wants you to be instead of doing these things that ultimately are going to cause our enemies to rise up against us? Good thinking. Even I, as well as my brothers and servants, have been lending them money and grain. Please, let's stop charging this interest. So what Nehemiah is saying, we've been giving away our portion, okay, so that they would have enough. So, and then you're making them pay interest. Ultimately, what he's saying is, what I'm giving to them to help them, you're taking from them. So none of this is going to work.
So every book in the Bible is about addressing the poor.
Yeah.
So they should already know all of this.
That's right.
And if you can't line up with God, I mean, that's God's whole mission is to take care of the poor.
That's right. Yep. Those that have no voice.
Yeah.
You go through Amos, you go through Micah, you go through the whole, almost every other one of the minor prophets, and it talks about the same thing. Yeah.
They should know it.
So he says, return their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses to them immediately, along with the percentage of money, grain, new wine, and fresh oil that you have been assessing them. So Nehemiah lays it out there. Okay, we're having our day of Jubilee right now. Everything that's theirs goes back to them, and what you took from them, you're gonna give back to. So that really sets everybody back even. It really does, because the noblemen still have all that they had before. They just don't have what they've taken.
Right.
Yeah. And so they responded, we will return these things and require nothing more of them. We will do what you say. So it almost echoes of the people of Israel with Moses at the mountain, when he starts giving them rules and regulations from God, and they all say, we'll do what you say. You know, only we find out later they didn't always follow through, and some of that happens here later too. So I summoned the priest and made everyone take an oath to do this. I also shook the folds of my robe and said, may God likewise shake from his house and property everyone who doesn't keep this promise. May he be shaken out and have nothing. So that was a symbolic gesture. Their robe was kind of rolled up in their belt. And so he kind of let it out, and all the folds emptied. And so there was nowhere to hide. He couldn't hide anything in the folds of his robe because it was all let down. And that's what he's saying here. Same thing will happen to you if you break this oath. You're going to fall out of God's robe, and you'll just be left laying there. The whole assembly said, amen. And they praised the Lord. Then the people did as they had promised. So this whole thing ends in two things. They say amen, which means what?
So be it.
So be it. And then worship comes out. They praise the Lord. They thank God. Why would they praise the Lord? Okay? They've just lost. I mean, these people had lost a lot of wealth right there. Yeah. Yeah, they had a catharsis. They had a cathartic moment where that sense where you know you're doing wrong, and then finally you realize it and do something about it. We've all been there. And it just goes whoosh. It's like a washing over. Yeah. And so, yeah, when that happens, worship breaks out. Okay, verse 14. Furthermore, from the day King Artaxerxes appointed me to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year until his 32nd year, 12 years. He'd been there 12 years. I and my associates never ate from the food allotted to the governor. So he'd been sent there as governor, and the rule was the governor got, portions of food, probably choice portions, and probably too much. But he's saying that I never ate from that food. He always did what? It went to the people that were burdened. So the governors who preceded thee had heavily burdened the people, taking from them food and wine, as well as a pound of silver. So the governors before him had not only eaten all the food and drank all the wine, they put a tax of 1 pound of silver on them too. Their subordinates also oppress the people. So whatever happens at the top, okay, trickles down. Yeah, that's why in our system, we trust the character and will of the people more than we do those that are over us. Mm-hmm. We trust that the character and wisdom of the people are going to work its way up to the leaders. See, and this is working the wrong direction. Their subordinates also oppress the people but because of the fear of God, I didn't do this. Mm-hmm. So Nehemiah's understanding about his life and how he led his people and cared for his people came out of the reverence that he had for God and God's activity in his life. He did not want to fail God.
This is Christ-like servant leadership.
Yes.
And out of that, you gain respect. You gain the confidence of the people.
Yes.
Okay, an example being, when I first started in this church, I had a mentality of being a slave driver. Okay, I was a hard boss to work for. Mm-hmm. Okay, and one of the things that I realized in that was that volunteers don't have to do what you tell them to do.
No, they don't.
Okay.
They've got to have a deeper motivation.
Do what needs to be done because they have a respect for you and what you are doing.
Yeah. Okay.
And until I realized that and changed my way of dealing with things, I couldn't be a leader in this church.
Yeah.
I have to go.
Okay.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Hope everything's okay. Let me know if I can do anything for you.
Yeah, I'll be back. I got to pick up Rebecca. And
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we do need to lift them up.
Oh, yeah.
That whole family right now is going through some heavy turmoil.
Really, some tough stuff. And then the wreck 45 minutes ago or an hour ago.
They just had a wreck?
Not a wreck. She
Passed out.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it had caused a wreck. It didn't. She just passed out at the stop sign?
Or something, yeah.
Okay.
My goodness.
All right. Let's go on. So in verse 16 it says, instead, I didn't oppress the people. Instead, I devoted myself to the construction of this wall, and all my subordinates were gathered there for the work. We didn't buy any land. So what's he saying here? My focus was my godly purpose. I came here to build a wall, and all those that I brought with me, I've managed to keep focused on building a wall. We didn't buy any land when we got here. Evidently, Nehemiah did not have an inheritance of the land. He wouldn't have had to buy any. But he says, I didn't do anything. I haven't done anything other than focus on the task at hand.
That's why they stood by him.
Yeah, and that's why he got the work done. I don't know if he did or not, or if it just...
Well, he was in exile his whole life, and then he
yeah, he was
back
born
up
in it.
here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, why would for him to even want to come back would be because of his ancestors. So do you think he would have had inheritance?
Well...
Because, I mean, otherwise, he wouldn't have any...
Yeah, I don't know. Well, and then the whole thing probably was... I mean, people have been living there 150 years. If you were going to get your ancestral land back, you probably did have to pay for it. Or else you would have a war, wouldn't you?
That's kind of strange that they would throw that line in there.
Yeah.
He didn't acquire any land. Well,
yeah, but he didn't buy any.
He was in exile the whole time until he was a cupbearer. I mean, the whole time.
Yeah, he was born in exile.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what it may mean is that he didn't acquire anything extra.
Yeah.
He didn't buy
He was
anything
simply
extra.
there to build the wall.
Yeah.
what God.
Yeah. He had no interest in building wealth for himself. He had no interest in having anything other than accomplish the task that God had provided him to do. And that's an important thing to know in life too.
It's not else.
Yeah.
God.
That's right. And some of those things that God gives us are for a lifetime. And then some things he gives us and it's for a season. And this was definitely a thing that was meant to be for a season. He wasn't going to build a wall for the rest of his life. And so he's recognized that enough to know the difference. And that's what he does. So then he goes on, verse 17. There were 150 Jews and officials as well as guests from the surrounding nations at my table. Big table. Each day 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some fowl were prepared for me. An abundance of all kinds of wine was provided every 10 days. But I didn't demand the food allotted to the governor because the burden on the people was so heavy. So he had these people around his table. They would have this meal, but Nehemiah did what with his? He gave it away. Yeah. Yeah, gave it to the poor.
So who appointed him governor? The people?
Artaxerxes. Yeah.
He sent him over there.
Sent him
He was
over there.
Up there and sent him over there.
As governor.
Honored his request.
Yeah.
And he sends him as governor.
Yeah.
Because did he feel like that was the only way he'd get people to work for him?
I think that came along with him being able to request the materials and all that he received from the other leaders and governors from that area. He put him on equal footing with everybody else.
Yeah.
And so he was governor, and the people certainly would have seen him as governor because he was addressing the problems and getting it done.
He had authority.
Yeah, yeah. And not only authority because he was appointed governor, but because, and
the king told him.
That's right.
Go over there and help him.
But his authority, we find, is because of the laser type focus on what God had given him to do, and on his understanding of the law that God had given Moses and his application of that law that solved a really huge problem. I mean, we talk about inflation today. They had inflation. There was too many people chasing too few goods, and there wasn't enough to go around. And so they were dealing with inflation. They were dealing with overtaxation. They were dealing with price gouging on interest. I mean, everything was out of control economically. And Nehemiah said, whoa, this is wrong. And he went back to the old law and said, this is how we're supposed to do things. Now, obviously, it was different from the way everybody else in the world was doing it. Okay, they had learned these practices, and it was making them quite rich. But God's way is not the world's way. And so what does this accomplish? We see what it accomplishes. The people that had their land still had their land. The people that had lost their land because of all these practices, economic practices, had regained their land. And everything that they had had to give up unjustly, according to the way God does things, they had received back. So that's equal footing.
Yeah, he didn't let his status go to his head.
Yeah.
Like most people would have.
Now, you think about living in a world like that today.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Think about how complicated it is today, because we're trying to make a percentage point on every dollar.
Nehemiah's coming. I'm sorry.
I mean, we're talking about, as an example, this whole oil embargo thing. We don't buy oil from Russia because they're doing a terrible thing, and rightfully so. I don't want to be a part of anything to do with that. But he'll sell it to China, and China will put it on the market, and we'll buy it from China. So he's still going to get his $130 a barrel. China's going to make their money off of it, and we'll eventually buy it, and we will have accomplished the same thing, but we'll feel better about it somehow. So how do you correct that? If everybody treated each other fairly, we wouldn't have that problem. And that was what Nehemiah was saying. You're not treating each other fairly. If the world was fair, there would be no Vladimir Putin's who just want to take stuff because
Well,
they can take it.
he was able to call them out. You see now, in our situation here, our dependency on Russian oil is very, very limited. I mean, we only get like 3% of Russia's oil. But our gas prices have increased because of the